Anyway, this kind of raises a general question about these restrictions that have been placed, these orders to stay home and keep 6 feet apart and all that stuff. Do they have any legal weight at all? So we're going to talk with Quentin Brogdon of Crain, Lewis and Brogdon here in North Texas right now, and he's on the phone. Good morning, Quentin.
Good morning, Amy, Dave. How are you today?
Pretty good. And we are social distancing. We're both working in the studios, but she's in a separate studio. We're about 15 feet apart, so everything's good here. All right, so we are seeing a lot of pushback from some churches who are just saying, hey, we're going to get together. It's what we do. We need to do this. Is that okay?
Well, it depends what measuring stick you're using. We have in Dallas County, our Judge Clay Jenkins has signed a stay-at-home order that on its face bars in-person religious services, but our Governor, Greg Abbott, has signed a statewide shelter-in-place order that carves out an exemption for houses of worship. But the governor has also said, perhaps somewhat inconsistently, some might say, that we should be following the federal guidance, which restricts gatherings of 10 or more people. And so if you're following that guidance literally, then it would be difficult, perhaps even impossible, to have your full church gathering in person. So many churches are doing these gatherings virtually using Zoom or other methods. But, the bigger legal question is the First Amendment, which mandates separation of church and state, but can the state, whether it's at the local level or the governor, prohibit by law the gatherings, the church gatherings. And the Supreme Court, our U.S. Supreme Court, has said that laws cannot unduly burden religion unless there's a compelling interest to do so. And, shutting down services in person, no doubt substantially burdens the religions. But the question is there a compelling enough interest to do it? And many would argue the answer is yes, given this virus. But others would say, well, these are church services, and if you're keeping people from meeting in person, you're overstepping your bounds as the government. So that's the debate, really.
I guess the compelling interest would be saving lives. What if they do almost like a drive-through movie theater, and they have people just drive up in their cars outside of the church, and they have the pastor on a microphone, and every family's in their own car? I think that could be something that would work, no?
Yes. From what I've read, I think most churches are going to be doing things virtually and or with distancing, not having the traditional gatherings where you get everybody in the same, get the whole congregation in the same room, because it would be difficult, if not in many cases impossible, to keep social distancing and to keep that margin of safety if you do the traditional gathering. So the sense I'm getting from the media reports and elsewhere is that most churches are not going to be having the traditional service.
All right, this is not something I expect to see in the Supreme Court. It'll all be water under the bridge before it could get there, I'm sure. But although I could be wrong, they may take it on just as a philosophical question. But Quentin, you said that you said something about the separation of church and state, and I thought we've been assured for years. The Constitution doesn't even include that phrase, nor even imply it. All it says is that the government cannot create a church, right?
Well, the First Amendment itself, the language of it, is just a little over 40 words. It's
right.
Pretty general and vague, and so it's been left to the courts, most particularly the U.S. Supreme Court, to interpret it. And so the test that has evolved over the years through many cases is this test about undue burdens and whether they're applied equally to secular, that is, non-religious institutions. So, for instance, you could come up with a scenario where you're governing fire safety. If you have a general regulation for buildings that says not more than X people can go and be in a building of, this many square feet, as long as you're applying that to churches and to non-church institutions equally, most would say then that's a regulation that would pass muster. And so the argument in favor of these bans is churches are not being singled out. They're being treated in the same way as any other gathering. But then the counter argument is, well, churches, are in a unique position and somehow deserve an exemption. And the governor, Greg Abbott, exempted them, but then he also said, but you should be following the federal CDC, Centers for Disease Control guidelines, and those guidelines say don't have more than 10 people together and maintain social distancing. So the governor has arguably said different things. He first implied that the shelter-in-place rule would not apply at all to churches, but then he said, well, but you should still follow the federal guidelines.
All right, Quentin, we appreciate your expertise this morning, as always. We've been talking to Quentin Brogdon with, let's see, my computer's not
Crain
cooperating.
Brogdon Rogers is
Thank you. Crain, Lewis, and Brogdon. Yes, thank you very much.
All right, KLIF News Tech. Thanks, Quentin.